Whether you're looking for answers to specific life questions or seeking to become the best version of you possible, welcome to the Mental Breakdown and Psych Reg podcast, where we offer insight, information, and strategies based upon research and years of practice as clinical psychologists. So sit back, have a listen, and get connected with our hosts, Dr. Bernie Wilkinson and Dr. Richard Marshall. Welcome back. Richard, we just finished an interesting, fantastic conversation with Brian Syzdek. Syzdek?
Syzdek.
Syzdek.
Right.
I am...
Like Dak.
We just listened to how he pronounces his name again before we recorded this intro, and I'm just horrible with it.
Right. I had the pleasure. This is interesting the way this whole thing worked out. I had the pleasure of meeting Brian at a conference, the Arizona Association of School Psychology. We had he was at the our publisher is PAR,
right? And
he is the he's a product manager at a publisher called Stolting. And I have trouble with that. And
as long as it's not a person's name. No. If it's not a person's name, I'll be all right.
Well, he's the project. So I talked to him briefly at the event, but then we all went out to dinner, or several of us went out to dinner Friday night, last Friday night. And so he and I were able to talk additionally about products. We also got involved in baseball. He's a big Tigers fan, Detroit Tigers fan. So when I came back and I told you about it, you looked it up and contacted him. And then you were able to arrange.
You know what? No, actually, he contacted us. He wrote to us on Facebook and was like, "Hey, I met Richard. It'd be great. I'd love to come on the podcast." He had listened to some of the podcasts, and he said, he'd love to come on and talk about.
So he actually contacted.
Yeah.
Okay.
He contacted us, and I was like, "Brian, that sounds like a great idea."
Well, we had gone through his catalog, and what fascinated us about his catalog is that Dr. Bernie and I are neuropsychologists, but they have a whole section on neuroscience, and going all the way back to anatomical neuroscience. They have all this equipment that I haven't seen for years, and I had no idea that his company was still involved in producing that laboratory level science equipment. So that piqued our curiosity a little more. But then he contacted you about being on the podcast. Okay. Well, anyway, Brian is he's actually trained as a clinical psychologist. He majored in psychology, has worked in various clinical settings, and then went to work for Stolting. This company. He has actually completed a doctor of psychology in clinical psychology, and has a master's in applied statistics, which is necessary, out of our wheelhouse. But that's the strength of him being in that company, because the products they develop, of course, have to be analyzed. So he brings both the clinician's background and the statistician's background to the task,
which is a tough addition. It's a tough part, because that stats part is really,
and to have a master's in it means that he's good in math and knows his way around statistical analysis. But he's worked in a variety of clinical settings, schools and residential treatment centers, hospitals, hospital-based programs. So he has a rich and varied background, and then he has this broad knowledge of the products that they produce. And we were particularly interested in a set of products, and that is their therapeutic games. So we were able to talk to him at length about the therapeutic games that they publish.
One of the things that certainly we do, and most therapists who work with kids do, is we incorporate games into therapy. And so we play cards or Uno or chess or checkers. Different kinds of games. We'll incorporate that into the play or into the therapy session for a variety of reasons, and of which we talk about sort of at the beginning of the podcast, and then we move into some of the topic-specific therapeutic games that they sell there at Stolting that are just really interesting and really provide an interesting and engaging forum for dealing with some of the things that we work on with kids.
It's a really good approach in theory, especially with younger children or children who are a little slow to warm, and you can sort of use these as warm-ups or icebreakers, and they have quite quite an impressive array and selection, cover a variety of topics across age levels.
Right.
So,
right. Yes, we recorded the podcast sort of late morning on a Saturday, and because of that, we get some lags in our internet. So throughout the video portion of the podcast, you're going to get to see some of their products that we talk about. You'll be able to see some of the action play from some of the games, and so you won't actually see us talking back and forth, but you'll be able to see some of the games and some of the things that are available. So if you are working with a therapist, or your kid is working with a therapist, and you're interested in some of these and think that they may be helpful, you can talk with your therapist about using some of them in your therapy sessions.
Right. Yeah.
So, all right. So that's it. That's the end of our introduction, right?
It should. Yes, it is.
All right. So let us know what you think. We'd love to hear from you. But until then, enjoy the podcast. Hey.
Hi. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good.
Good.
So. Right. Oh, there. I can see you.
Okay. Good. I've not used Google Hangouts before, so am I coming through loud and clear?
You are. The video is a little bit lagging, but that happens sometimes when we try to record videos, interviews this time of the morning on the weekend. But
could just be me being Sunday morning, a little slow to the uptake here.
As long as you've earned it, Brian, it's okay.
Morning, guys.
Good to see you again.
You too. Yes. Yeah. I've been enjoying some of the episodes of the podcast and getting a lot of good information, like what you guys are doing here.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks. We've been working on a whole bunch of new ideas also, so hopefully we're going to get some more things out there. We enjoy this medium for getting information out, I guess.
Yeah, it's great. You can listen to it in the car on the way to work, or just out and about. So it's a nice way to be able to connect.
Right. Absolutely. So, Brian, we were talking about it before we came on. How do you pronounce your last name?
Syzdek.
Syzdek. Okay.
Syzdek. Yeah.
All right. And the other one that we weren't sure, that I'm not sure about, it's a kind of a recurring joke that we have. I'm horrible at pronouncing names for some reason.
He failed phonics.
I blame my parents.
Well, but Syzdek is a tricky one. It's it seems like there should be a vowel in there more than there is, but
That's right. Brian, you need some more vowels.
Can I buy a vowel?
Right.
But the
name of your company,
is it Stolting?
Stolting. Yep, you got it.
Right. See, I got that one. I got
it too.
Well, great. Well, we're really excited to talk to you because we've talked a lot about tests and different things that psychologists use to work with their patients or clients, and you are the first opportunity we've had to talk to somebody who actually is sort of in the thick of developing those kinds of tests and working with authors who are developing those kinds of tests. And so we're really excited to talk to you on the podcast.
Thanks. Yeah, actually, that's something that I'm excited about, working in the role that I'm working at, is being able to develop tests that are useful for the clients, useful for the clinicians. Having worked clinically myself, done assessments, I think it's important to be able to give clinicians the tools that they need to be able to, provide informative and helpful assessments to people. So, and then provide that clinical support for people using them. So, I'm glad to be able to connect. I want to know what's, clinicians are using, how they're using the assessments, and, stay in touch with people that way.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, tell us a little bit about you first. Tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into this field.
Sure. I was an undergrad, majored in psychology, and then immediately after completing undergrad, I had some experience working in therapeutic camps and working in residential treatments for kids with emotional behavioral disturbances. I really liked the processing I was able to do with kids during those times. So wanted to complete my graduate education in clinical psychology. I've had some experiences working in schools, doing assessments, doing individual and group therapy, and then completing, my clinical work. Like I said, decided I wanted to go a little bit more upstream in the assessment process, and I've been at Stolting now about a year as a product manager, and in that role, I'm working with authors to complete assessments, providing clinical support to clinicians who are using the assessments, and just doing some marketing, getting the word out about some of the assessments and therapeutic products that we have.
Well, that's fantastic. I know that one of the when we were initially talking about talking with you for the podcast and everything, we went online to the website, and you guys sell such a wide variety of products. It kind of took me back to some of when I was an undergraduate and some of the basic science research that we would do at the university.
Yeah.
It was amazing.
Stereotactic equipment. I was shocked. I thought, wow, I haven't seen this for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Stolting's been around for about 130 years.
Okay.
So we have several divisions. The neuroscience division, which has the stereotactic equipment, as well as a couple other, and then the psychology division. So it's, as a psychologist, it's kind of like being in a candy store. You get to walk around and see all the different assessments, and with such a long history that we've had, go back and look at some of the historical assessments and see how assessments have developed over the years. So I like to go back in the warehouse and just kind of walk around, get lost a bit. It's fun.
Well, it's not very often, or there's not very many places where you can go and buy a rat respirator, and I really
I've been
and as I mentioned in the email to you, my daughter, she has a few people, other listeners will probably not care about this at all, but she has a few pet rats. You don't really think about how intelligent they are and everything. But I was looking at the elevated T maze, and I was thinking, man, that would be really cool to have. See if we can train our rats a little bit.
Really teach those rats some things.
Yeah. I mean, hats off to your daughter. I can't understand that perspective, but a lot of the some of the findings that we discuss in psychology, a lot of those come from a lot of the laboratory work with rats. I remember learning a lot about the learned helplessness studies. A lot of those are done with the equipment we use, some of the water mazes that they develop in neuroscience. And so it's kind of neat seeing where some of those findings actually come from with the equipment that we make there.
Yeah. Absolutely. Very cool. So we're going to talk a little bit today, though, as much fun as it would be to talk about animal models and things. We're going to talk a little bit today about games and the use of games therapeutically, because again, Stolting sells a wide variety of games and therapeutic activities for clinicians to use with their patients.
We do, yeah. We sell a lot of different psychological assessments, a lot of different psychotherapeutic products, board games, some card games, different kinds of art projects. The idea is just to try to keep people engaged in therapy, and there's some advantages to using the games, and some ways that it can enhance play therapy and just the whole therapeutic process.
Very cool.
Yeah, the games were fascinating. It was a missed opportunity. I was sitting beside Brian for about an hour that morning at the conference, and we didn't meet until later that day. But these, I've been through the website now in more detail. In addition to the stereotactic equipment and rat training, I was fascinated by the section on games. And there were two or three in particular. Is there... I guess the first question I have is, who made the decision to go into the game part of your business? Was that decision made years ago, or is it more recent?
It had to have been years ago. Not exactly sure how it came about. I do know Stolting is in general interested in things that, anything that can be useful in the therapeutic process. And a lot of times our games, our assessments are just generated by clinicians who are using some sort of game they developed. And then they're able to work with us. We have the engineers on site doing the stereotactic equipment and other things, so we can help take their idea and, make it production ready.
Now, are you gonna stay in the game business?
I think so. Yeah, it's it's helpful. I think every clinician should have a couple games in their tool bag, and yeah, we're able to provide those for people. People are interested in them, and I think that's a helpful thing for clinicians.
Yeah, because there were several that I thought, man, this would be nice to have in the office.
Yeah.
And we do groups here.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking about our groups could use those, several of those games. But I was particularly interested. Can I talk about one in particular? The game about the apocalypse.
Right.
Why do you like?
Yeah, After Time Survival. Yeah.
Yes, right.
That's
right.
our newest game, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, it's set in the post-apocalyptic future. And the players need to try to rebuild society, and they earn different points and eventually houses through the choices they're making. So some of the choices they make benefit the individual, some benefit the society, and they have to try to balance those out.
Mm-hmm.
A particular game was used in a wellness classroom and was found to increase factors of wellness in the participants that played it. So, there's some research behind it, and the author's idea was to try to engage the probably middle schoolers or high schoolers who are playing it, and not overtly just, instill therapy or teaching them empathy or something like that.
Yeah, we do some work at a local high school, and we do groups there as well. And that game in particular, I think, would have appeal to these early high school kids, 9th and 10th graders who are making that transition. And I'm thinking about using it with them. So I was glad to see that.
Yeah. And there's a facilitator's guide in there to show how you might use it, and like a wellness classroom as a proactive type of tool. You could use it in a group therapy setting. You could use it individual therapy. You could use it with a family during family therapy.
Yeah.
That's great.
I didn't think about the family.
Yeah. So you mentioned it a moment ago, but let's talk a little bit about the benefits of using games in the therapeutic process.
Yeah. I think using games in therapy probably comes under the umbrella of play therapy. But typically when we say play therapy, we're usually referring more to like unstructured play, in which, the parallel process of things that the child's experiencing in their day-to-day is reenacted in therapy. And then the therapist can assess and work through that with the child. So board games are a little bit different, but I think there's some unique advantages that they offer. And so some of the good board games in therapy, you look at them to be able to build some skills that kids can use in therapy and then also in the real world. So, for example, one of the games we have is called Kids World, and in that game, the kids are working their way around the board, answering different questions, and those questions are related to helping the kids learn to process, develop coping skills, and develop leisure skills. So it's got some real tangible goals that the kids are working towards. The game should be engaging. Like, I think After Time has a good storyline, and so keeps the kids engaged in therapy. A lot of kids might be reluctant to be in the therapeutic process, so a game can really help break the ice. Or just, the idea of sitting across from someone and engaging in traditional talk therapy could be a little too intense for someone just starting out, so games can help break the ice. And then games that allow for family interaction could be a good way to help families develop leisure skills, allow them to learn to process, in ways that using electronics or some activity that they might traditionally use might not develop. So those are some of the things that I think therapy games bring, and some qualities of good therapy games that would be helpful.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that's really interesting about the whole idea of using games and play therapy in general is I don't think many people realize the variability in play therapy,
Right.
because you have, when we talk about, we did a series of podcasts about last month, I think, where we talked about cognitive behavioral therapy and psychoanalytics and just a different or psychoanalysis, not psychoanalytics, but psychoanalysis. But all of those different types of therapy sort of exist within the play therapy realm as well, because you can, a lot of times people will look at, or therapists will look at, the way in which different relationships are manifest within the way the child plays. In some of the games that you're talking about, it's almost cognitive behavioral in of sorts, where they're having to make decisions and look at the consequences of those decisions and figure out what they're going to do and how they're going to play the game. So it's really a much more complex form of therapy than just sitting around and playing games.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think basically every modality of therapy could have some play version of it for use with young people or just people who would benefit from that. And I think, it's more, a good therapeutic game is different than like a traditional board game, like Monopoly or something. A therapeutic game, you do want to bring in therapeutic factors, and some of the ones I mentioned allow the client and therapist to be able to explore some of the therapeutic processes together, or help the client learn to process. It brings some additional elements beyond just a traditional board game.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, the obvious question that everybody has been asking us, we go from board games to electronic games. Is that something your company is going to be doing or considering?
We've not gotten into electronic games yet, and I'm not aware of many people that have as much. I think a couple reasons for that. Number one, I feel like kids get a lot of electronic games in their lives, and they don't get as much board games these days. So allowing them the chance to be able to interact with their family in a board game is an important thing. I think electronic games, there could be some potential to bring in some of those good therapeutic factors that I was mentioning that apply to board games, but it's difficult. Kids, when they're playing electronics, just tend to shut down and get in that electronic world a little bit more. So there's less opportunity for interactions, discussing things. So I think there's a possibility there. We'd like to maybe get into developing an after time as a video game. I think that would be a cool application of it, but we haven't yet. I think it would have to be thought through and be pretty careful.
Well, for what you guys are doing, I think board games work much better. What I would worry about with electronic games is that isolation factor that kids tend to get focused on the game, and it's not as interactive as you would like it. I know there are ways to do that. Right. Patients play games with kids from other parts of the country, but I like the idea of a board game because it fosters that very personal, interpersonal collaboration, cooperation relationship, whereas board games give you that. Electronic games always have that distance.
Right.
You're once removed from a real relationship.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, and I think maybe part of it is just the electronic games that people are playing these days. They're by nature designed to just engage you in the screen, and so then transitioning to that same modality in a therapeutic game would be a pretty big jump.
Yeah. I think it's one of the things I would like for us to, and would love to hear your, I know you said you worked clinically, and I know you've worked in multiple settings. One of the things that I hear from parents sometimes, especially, is they'll say, they'll come here for the first time and they'll have had some experience with therapists in the past, and the parents will say, well, all they did was play games. They just kind of went in and played games the whole time, and I want them to do something more than just play games.
Do real therapy.
Yeah, do real stuff.
Right.
How did you ever experience that? And if so, how did you respond to those kinds of questions?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's a good question. The parents, the child's time is valuable, and it may seem like you're just bringing the kid there to just play games. That might not be a good use of time. Um, I think there's a couple ways that I've responded. Number one, games really help develop the relationship. Particularly kids who've had some interpersonal difficulties in the past, they can have a difficult time. That's asking a lot from any kid to sit down in front of some adults and say, all right, now we're going to talk for an hour about big things that are happening in your life.
Sometimes that's a lot to ask from a therapist to sit
Yeah, right.
for an hour.
Yeah, absolutely. So games are just kids' natural language. Kids learn a lot through play. They're able to interact through play. And so games serve the purpose of rapport building, number one. The research has shown that therapeutic relationship is the most important factor in determining success in therapy.
Right.
So if we just jump into skill building or, processing without developing that relationship first, it's not productive and may even be counterproductive.
Right.
The other thing games do, and this may not be immediately apparent, is, like I said, they're bringing up issues that the therapist and the client are able to discuss. So a lot of times, if there's like some difficulty at home or at school, you might see that in themes during the play, or you might just hear the kid discussing that as they're playing the game. So it's in a more incidental, less direct way.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of times the kids that I work with is at least, while we're playing, their attention is on the game, and so it drops defenses down significantly, and so they're much more willing to talk about things. But the other thing is that what I try to do with parents is explain what it is that I'm looking at during the games, because I don't have some of the games that you guys sell right yet. We're looking to
have them yet
to get them, but if I'm sitting down, if I'm playing chess with a patient, chess or Uno or Rummy or any card games or anything like that, those games tell me a lot about a way a kid problem solves, about executive functioning skills, about planning and impulsivity and all of those things. And that's really informative for the process that I'm trying to do, perhaps in helping them resolve some of the challenges they're having.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you said, Bernie, I definitely agree with, just being upfront with the parents and being collaborative with them. I'm a big advocate of helping the parents being self-advocates for themselves, the clients be self-advocates for themselves. And so by giving them information about what's happening, can really help that process. Now, that being said, I probably wouldn't necessarily, describe it as it's happening with the child, right?
Right.
The minute I say that I'm actually working through these things with you as you're playing this game, it kind of kills the mood and takes it away. But just describing with them at the outset that we'll be playing some games together. And, we might be talking through things as we're playing. I think that's all fair and can be helpful for everyone.
Yeah. You don't want to say, by the way, while we're playing this game, I'm going to distract you so I can ask you about your relationship with your family.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it. It'll be all right.
That's an adult thing to say. Yeah, that totally takes it out of the play realm.
Right.
Yeah. So some of these games are a little bit different than what a lot of people, again, as you kind of mentioned earlier, think about as it relates to play therapy specifically. Some of these games, and there's a number in you guys' catalog that really focuses on some specific topics. And talk a little bit about some of the specific topics that some of these games may focus on.
Sure. I think just emotions in general is one specific topic. We have a game I'm thinking of called Emotional Bingo. And it's just helping kids learn the language of how to express their emotions. So, kids I've worked with in the past, a lot of times they're pretty limited in their ability to identify what they're experiencing. So it might just be that they're in some, kind of neutral, calm state, and then immediately they jump to anger, and then there's some reaction, some behavior that accompanies that. Whereas if you can help them, break things down emotionally a little bit more specifically, they can start to realize maybe there's some nuance in anger. So maybe I start off with frustration, and if I can learn to identify frustration, then I can try to use some skills at that point before it jumps to anger. Or maybe they learn, wow, I'm actually sad at this moment, and it's not anger, but that's how I'm coping with it, because sadness might be a little too difficult to deal with. So emotional bingo is a good one for developing emotions. Anger is definitely one that we address. There's some games called Use Your Anger. And the idea is that, anger, I think, can be a pretty scary thing for kids, for adults, where a lot of times we react in certain ways to our anger, and that's very off-putting to people, and then there might be some consequence to that. But really, the first step in learning to manage anger is learn to get a little bit more comfortable with it and learn to identify what anger is, and then you can learn how to react to it. So a lot of the games are just, taking these concepts and allowing kids and in the group therapy to be able to work with it a little bit better.
Yeah, that's great. I love those emotions-based games, because you're absolutely right. As soon as you start talking to, especially a young kid, maybe even up to middle school, and you're talking about some of these different emotions, they certainly identify good emotions and bad emotions. And it's almost like they're trained to stop bad emotions. We're not allowed, it's bad to get angry. We're not allowed to get angry anymore. But sometimes anger is the right response. It's the right emotion, and figuring out how to use that emotion is really the most important thing.
Absolutely, yeah. Emotions, I'm thinking of the movie Inside Out, and
absolutely.
That's a great movie. I've definitely used that in therapy. And just knowing that emotions serve a purpose, and it's how we react to the emotions and how we use them that really determines whether the outcomes are helpful or unhelpful.
Right. I think that was the most appealing part. As I went through each game, it was something that we teach here, that it's okay to be angry. It's what you do about the anger. And what the games do is they move kids in that direction. And that's what I find so attractive about these. So it's opened up a whole new area for me, but consistent with what we're already doing. So
yeah.
I think it's a great contribution.
Yeah. And probably works in whatever modality of therapy that you're working from. That's a very act-based concept. That's a CBT concept, learning to manage emotions.
Right.
Or exploring them to be more psychodynamic. So it applies in pretty much every realm.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the company catalog, I know that probably your primary audience, your primary customer are therapists and other clinical providers. Do you sell these games, or are these games appropriate? I suppose would be the most appropriate first question. Are they appropriate for families to have at home, or is it more for a clinical setting?
I think some games, so primarily our audience is clinicians, psychologists, school psychologists. I think some games could be appropriate at home. We typically just sell to the clinician directly. Even therapeutic games, which might seem kind of innocuous, could bring up some themes that I think I'd want a family to explore under the guidance of a therapist. And it could be introduced in therapy and then applied as a homework assignment, let's say, where the goal is to play the game and learn to play it together. But I think typically through the clinician would be the way that families would get introduced to a lot of the games.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we could do it here and then teach them, and then they could take it at home and do it at home as well.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
Because that's where it has to work. Mm-hmm. I mean, we can make everything work here, but all this stuff has to be implemented at home.
Right.
all the interventions and things.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
Yeah.
And are these games usually games that you would play over the course of one session, or do you have games that sort of follow I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, follow a sequence, so that you play it like over the course of 10 sessions, you go through these different activities as part of the game, or are they usually sort of single setting types of games?
I think most of the games tend to be games that you could complete in one session. And so you might do it just for one session, but you might do it over repeated sessions. In my experience, I think kids would be kind of unsatisfied if the game wasn't able to be completed within one session. But like After Time, for example, is something they implemented in the wellness class over 3 sessions. So they just introduced it session 1, and then they played it repeatedly 3 different times. And all the games, you're getting new cards, different questions. So it's like a different experience each time. And you might explore how the child, as a therapist, you might explore how the child's evolving in their reactions to the questions over time, or compare what they answered in the past, or how they are able to handle a rule differently in a future session versus a past one. So it could be played over time, definitely.
Yeah. I have a couple of kids that I play regular games with when they come in, and it's become a joke. We kind of tease each other as we're coming in. He asks me if I'm ready to lose. We play like rummy, and it has, the first couple of times that we played, and everything was fine. It was over the summer, and then when school returned and he started coming in and playing, I could see a big difference, and it was because he started taking his ADHD medication and he wasn't taking it before. And so now I can see, all right, that's interesting. And so, and then you can see a difference between a morning session when the medication's still really on board, and then a late afternoon session when the medication's wearing off. But probably the most fascinating thing that's come about with him is now, because he's really comfortable, we have a decent rapport and everything. Now when I beat him, I can start seeing some of the anger coming out that his mom talks about. And so now I see, so this is what mom's talking about when he's getting comfortable. Now we're starting to see some of that anger. And so it does take a little bit of time really to start seeing some of this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great example. And it allows the child also to be able to see it. It gives them some tangible experience rather than kind of some abstract thing that's happening in the past. It's happening right in the moment. You got data that you both can work with there. And that's an interesting point you bring up, that sometimes therapy, the games might seem like they're becoming less counterproductive. He's, getting angry, maybe throwing the cards, but actually that gives you something to work with during the moment.
Absolutely. So,
better than relying on a 8-year-old memory.
Right.
Yeah. If you could actually produce it, the game actually produces the behavior you're looking for. Right.
Yeah.
I like it.
So we kind of talked a lot about different games. Is there anything else about any of this that you'd like to share with the audience that we haven't talked about? I know we've talked a lot about it.
We did, yeah. I think we got through a lot, and I think there's a lot of games that can be useful for therapists, for clients. It gives can help make therapy a little bit fun at times. As you brought up, it can bring up some different emotions at times too, and gives you a lot of things to work with. So we've got games that I can give people more information about too. I set up for a couple of our games some examples on YouTube, just some video clips of them, so people can get a little experience for what the games are like that way. But yeah, I think they're great tools to use.
Fantastic. Well, certainly, I will post a link to all of those things, or to those YouTube videos in the show notes. How else can people learn more about these games, or learn more about what you guys are doing at Stolting, and follow some of that research?
Sure. Well, through our website, stoltenco.com is one of the primary ways that people can see some of the different materials that we have under our psychology tab. And like I said, it could be something that a family might see and then bring up with their clinician and help advocate for treatment that way. We've got a Facebook page, Stolten Co Psychology, and Twitter, Stolten Co at Twitter. So those are some different ways that people can get involved with things that we're doing and stay up to date.
Fantastic.
Good.
Well, I'll have a link to all of those things in the show notes so people can just kind of click on it and follow all that work. So
there's another game we have to talk about.
Which one? What game is that?
Baseball game. I didn't forget.
You did not, yeah.
Okay. We expect you here this spring, Brian.
I would love to do that. Yeah, get the Tigers off to a good start.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. He's a Tigers fan.
Brian's a Tigers fan, and so, of course, Lakeland is the home of for spring training for the Detroit Tigers.
So Justin's not here, but we'll be okay with some others.
Yeah.
But anyway, no, I really would like for you to, if you can, come on down during spring training, and we can certainly go to some of those games too. So
that would be fantastic. Yeah, that would be a great time to come visit Florida from Chicago.
Yeah.
Right around.
Oh, absolutely. Anytime after February.
Yeah.
It's good. So yeah, that would be a great time to leave Chicago.
Excellent. That sounds great.
Then in July, is a good time to leave Chicago.
Yeah, it's only in the 90s in March.
You'll get a nice suntan. You get some vitamin D, and you'll be in good shape. You come down and visit.
I was just raking leaves all yesterday, so I'm about ready to come down right now.
We have now. Wait until the winter.
It's still pretty green here.
It is.
We had a few cold days recently, but
cold. It's a relative term.
It was it was in the mid to upper 70s. That was cold.
I'll take that.
Okay.
So, well, Brian, thanks so much for
thanks for talking to us, Brian.
Yeah.
This has been really good, really helpful.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we have a lot of therapists and psychologists who listen to the podcast, and so I'm sure this will be helpful for them, and hopefully they'll be able to find some new ways to reach out to their patients and help them.
Yeah, and if you have new stuff, coming out, you want to come back on, just let us know.
Yeah.
Okay. That sounds great.
Yeah, love to have you again. Yep,
absolutely. So great. Well, thanks again.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, bye.
Take care.